And we are back with the fourth segment of the GSMC Sports Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this fourth segment, we are going to be looking at the NFL games that took place on Monday. There were two games, that took place in Week 5. I wanted to talk about them because I didn't really get to talk about them when they literally after they started playing. And we're already at Week 6, and I might as well go ahead and cover what happened in Week 6 on Thursday night. The Chargers, they ended up beating the Broncos. They ended up winning 34-27. And fun fact, the Chargers ended up making the first free kick in the NFL since like 1975 or something like that. It was a very long time ago that they did that, but what happened was the Chargers, they ended up punting with no time left on the clock, and because there was no time left on the clock, there was a penalty flag that was thrown, and it ultimately moved the ball a little bit closer to the point where it was in field goal range. And so because there was no time on the clock, they took the penalty and they would get a free play out of that, and they decided to use that free play to score a field goal to end the half, it's very funny, but that's how it worked. And it was very funny, like that's how the first free 3 points, I guess you could say, were assessed in the NFL game. But again, the final score 34-27, and I keep getting notifications. Can those please go away? The final score, Justin Herbert, he ended up scoring 2 touchdowns in the air. He threw for 284 yards and 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. Now, Bo Nix ended up recording 263 yards, 2 touchdowns, and no interception, but they ended up falling short in this game. And it's unfortunate, but now this is like the Chargers and the Broncos, they are 9-6. And since the Chargers just beat the Broncos, they hold the tiebreaker, and they seem to be in the second spot of the AFC West. We'll see how that goes as far as playoff implications. But I will say that this playoff race between the Chargers and the Broncos, it is getting very, very close. And we are almost getting to that point of the NFL season where playoffs is going to be a prominent factor in a lot of sports viewership, because let's face it, everyone is going to watch the NFL playoffs. And we already have teams that have clinched a spot in the playoffs, and we already have teams that have clinched a spot in their division. The Chiefs and the Bills, as we know, they clinched their division, and the Texans have clinched their division as well. And the Steelers, they clinched the playoffs, I believe. I don't think they clinched their division just yet, just because the Ravens are still out there, and they could still wreak havoc on their on the division, and they could still end up getting a home wild card spot. So we'll see how that goes in the end. But those are just an idea of how the standings are looking, at least in the AFC as of right now. And this is obviously, this was a big win for the Chargers. They needed this just so that way they could secure a better chance of making it into the postseason. But let's go ahead and get into these Monday night games, because there were 2 of them that ended up happening. So the Vikings, they ended up playing the Bears, and they ended up winning 30-12. Of course they did, because they're the Bears. Sam Darnold ended up recording 231 passing yards and 1 touchdown, 1 interception. But again, the final score just tells you all that you need to know about this game. There were 2 rushing touchdowns in this game for the Vikings, one from Aaron Jones Sr. and then the other one from Cam Akers. They ended up rushing in for a touchdown, and they both had 1 touchdown in this game. And for the Bears, they Caleb Williams, he still hasn't thrown an interception, which is really impressive in my opinion. But it's not like he's really playing all that great. He ended up throwing for 191 yards and 1 touchdown in this game. And the receivers, they weren't really all that, except for Keenan Allen, who ended up recording 82 yards and 1 touchdown on the day. Everyone else was sort of was all right. Now, I didn't watch this game, so I'm not sure if these receivers were suffering from drops, particularly Rome Odunze. He ended up getting targeted 7 times, but only was able to receive twice. He only recorded 2 receptions out of 7 targets, and it's not really ideal. I'm not entirely sure if he was dropping the ball most of the time in this game. The game that I really focused on was the other Monday night game, which was between the Falcons and the Raiders, and to be honest, neither one of these games were all that competitive. And I mean, for the Bears side, let me just conclude like the Bears by saying this: they really need to consider getting Caleb Williams help. I mean, it seems like, it's just going to be the same story. Like, it doesn't matter what quarterback they have, they're just still going to be the Bears. Now, I'm not saying that Justin Fields would have made this situation any better. In fact, I think the Bears would have been worse off with Justin Fields. But the way that the game worked, I mean, like, they just turned the ball over on downs. Then the Vikings responded with a field goal. Then the Bears ended up fumbling the ball, giving it back to the Vikings, and then the Vikings scored a touchdown later on that drive. Then the Bears had to punt. Then Sam Darnold gave them a gift and threw them an interception. But of course, the Bears turned it over on downs yet again, which led to a Minnesota field goal, and the score was already 13-0 at the half. Then both teams punted for a couple of times until the Bears ended up taking a field goal to make the score 13-3. But then the Vikings responded with a touchdown drive to make the score 20-3. Then the Bears answered back with a field goal. But then guess what? Minnesota scored another touchdown to make the score 27-6. And the rest of the game was basically just garbage time. The Bears, they ended up punting. Then the Bears ended up blocking a punt for the Vikings, and then that ultimately ended up going into that led to a Bears touchdown drive, which made the score 12-27. But again, that was just garbage time, and the final score of the game was 30-12. So a rather boring game. And the other game, the Falcons against the Raiders, it wasn't nearly as exciting either. Like, both of these games were pretty boring. Kirk Cousins, he finally threw a touchdown, and he's also getting replaced for the starting quarterback. Now, they're finally going to put Michael Penix in the starting quarterback as opposed to Kirk Cousins. Now, Kirk has not had a very solid last few weeks, I will say that. The Falcons have been struggling, and a big reason as to why they're struggling in a lot of these games is because of Kirk Cousins and his terrible quarterback play. The last game that they played was against the Vikings. Kirk Cousins threw 2 interceptions. He did throw for 344 yards, but again, 2 interceptions, that's not good at all. Then against the Chargers, he threw 4 interceptions, which is terrible. Then against the Broncos, where the Falcons were only able to score 6 points, ended up losing 38-6. And the Kirk Cousins, he did not throw a touchdown in this game, and no one actually scored in this game. And he ended up throwing an interception in this game and only 173 passing yards. And then against the Saints, again, another game where he didn't throw a touchdown, and another game where he threw an interception. So he's been very, very bad so far in these last few games. And it's a big reason why his touchdown to interception ratio looks the way that it is. It's because of that big slump towards the middle of the season. And it's not looking good. He started out like ridiculous. I'm sure we all remember that one week against Tampa Bay where he ended up recording 500 passing yards, which was insane. And now he just completely regresses, which is like, it's very weird. A lot of people on the internet were taking to it saying like, remove Kirk Cousins' chain. He does not deserve it, because, when Minnesota was winning back in 2022 with Kirk Cousins, he would always wear a chain every single time that they won, and look a little bit younger than what he actually did. And then they got beat by the Giants. I had to rub that in there. But again, Michael Penix is going to be the starting quarterback for the Falcons, and I'm not entirely sure if I agree with this move, but I will say, just based off of how they've been playing with Kirk Cousins, I guess there's no better time to do that. I mean, they're still fighting for a playoff spot. The Bucks, they have a better record than the Falcons by 1 game, so they could still theoretically make the playoffs, assuming that Tampa ends up dropping a couple of games. I don't think that's going to happen. So maybe not the best time to remove your starting quarterback, but again, Kirk Cousins has not been playing that well to even warrant the starting position. Again, this game was very, very, very boring. And like the Raiders, they do not have a solid quarterback at all. And it's not looking good. You think that the Falcons quarterback situation is bad. Wait till you look at the Raiders. It's almost as bad as the Giants quarterback situation. They're going to be shopping for a quarterback in this draft immediately. And Desmond Ridder, he ended up playing in this game. He ended up throwing 1 touchdown and 2 interceptions. So whether he played better than Kirk or whether he played worse than Kirk, that's up to you guys to decide. But that was the only touchdown that the Raiders ended up scoring in this game. This game was very boring. It started out with a Raiders fumble, then the Falcons punted, then the Raiders punted, and then Kirk Cousins scored the only touchdown of the game for the Falcons to make the score 7-0. And let me just see real quick the rest of the stats. Next, the Raiders, they ended up taking a field goal to make the score 7-3. Then the Falcons punted. Then the Raiders ended up getting a safety, so that gave Atlanta 2 points. But of course, Atlanta punted, and that made the score 9-3 going into the half. Then Kirk Cousins threw his interception. Then the Raiders had a punt blocked, which led to a Falcons field goal. Then they punted. Then the Falcons punted. Then the Raiders punted. Then the Falcons responded with a field goal to make the score 15-3. Then the Raiders punted. Then the Falcons punted. Then the Raiders threw an interception. Then the Falcons missed a field goal. And then finally, in garbage time, the Raiders ended up scoring a touchdown. And then the Falcons punted, and the Raiders still had a chance to win in the end if they would have went on the winning, like if they would have scored a touchdown on the drive, they would have had a chance to win the game in the end. But of course, it ends with an interception, and that was the end of it, as Desmond Ridder threw the final interception, which lost the Raiders the game. So yeah, very boring game. So that's all that I have on this NFL recap. So now we're going to go ahead and go into the final segment, which is just recapping all of the basketball news that took place, as well as some of the key games that happened from the time that I recorded this segment. So I'll be right back after this short break. Be sure to stay tuned.